Owasso, presented by Sprint. Be there now with 055.
When we were evacuating at Ganya in December of 1941, I asked my father what was happening, and he said to me, "We're at war." I remember so distinctly saying to him, "Papa, what's a war?" My father never answered that question. About midway through the occupation, a Japanese officer who was posted near our village often talked to my father in English. In time, my father asked him to teach me elementary Japanese, since you either spoke it or you suffered. One evening, our visitor, O'Hare, with head bowed, asked my father. He said, "Mr. Bloss, why are we at war?" And once again, my father did not answer the question. You know, perhaps there is no answer to such a question among the mortal souls who have to correct with the swords what the politicians had messed up with their pens. What is the moral of my story? Well, when O'Hare came to tell us he was being transferred to a unit assigned to defend against the Marines that were landing, I was surprised at how I felt for him as a human being. Another lesson that I learned during the struggle. I looked for O'Hare after the war in the stockade surrounding bomb. I did not find him. You know, in the early episodes of our program, I have mentioned the precautionary steps that we had to take to protect our families, such as building escape routes to hiding places. Now, the key to our security system was our dogs, which would bark incessantly at the sign of unusual activity. Well, rumors abounded one day that the dogs were being rounded up and they're going to be shipped away, slaughtered for food, and we had to turn them in. For a young fellow, I was about 14 or so, turning in your dog was just something awful. And I believe the Japanese really wanted to have him because they wanted to remove the security system that we had. Whatever the reason, when the big day came, like many other boys of my age, we had to walk down to the station about 2 miles away and turn in our dogs. And I left my dog, sadly, reluctantly. It took me hours to walk all the way back to the farm, totally shattered by having to turn in my dog. You know, as I rounded the old banyan tree, which still stands in order near the corner of our property, I heard panting sounds. I looked behind me, and there was old Buck, trailing me as if nothing had happened, and with part of his leash still dragging behind him. There were so many sad boys that day. I was one of the few happy ones. Buck had escaped. Good omen of things to come. You know, to appreciate the situation most of us were in during the occupation, picture yourself in a shelter made of leaves and bamboo and an empty cupboard in the kitchen. Now, very basic questions just jump out at you. Where do I get water? Hey, from the river, but you got to go to fetch it. Where do I get salt? Hey, from the seashore. Or you can make it. Hey, where do I get sugar? Well, you can choose sugar cane, or if you have tuba, you can boil the tuba and get syrup that way. Carbohydrates, you eat yams, mandioca, cassava, as it is called sometimes. If you want to find yams in the jungle, you look for gado. But be very careful. Gado is a very delicious potato, but in order to get to it, you have to get past the crown of thorns that surround it. And doing that would be like trying to get to a porcupine and petting it. Oil for cooking, you get that from the cream that you squeeze out of shredded coconut, which you then boil. Now, as hard as it may be to believe all this, trust me, that's the way it was. Now, to get the hang of it, go out and do it not for 2.5 years, but just for, say, 2.5 weeks. But you're not allowed to bring mosquito repellent, sun shield, pop tent, sleeping bags, flashlight, first aid kit, candy, chorizos, cookies, soft drinks, and pasteurized milk. And by the way, no CD players, no portable TVs, no radios, no chainsaws, no fishing poles, no Nintendo games. After all, this is real war, ain't it? While viewing some of the old pictures of wartime Guam with some friends recently, someone asked me what we did for clothes, since we did not have any department stores. Well, I can assure you we did not order from Sears or Penny Catalogs, or for that matter, we did not order from good old reliable Walter Fuel & Company. What most people did was wear out what they had, and then the patchwork began. But you know, patchwork was really a common way of recycling used clothes, and in its most sophisticated form, precious quilt work is the result, and they're highly valued and treasured. In our case, however, there was no replacement material. So what we patch, we use until patching time again and again. And in the course of time, you really don't ever get to remember what your original dress looked like when you first started. Now, if you're really lucky, you had a pair of shorts that lasted until you outgrew them. Those who were fortunate enough to have flour sacks made shorts and skirts out of them. Now, in those days, having XXX written on your pants or your skirt did not mean you were dirty. It meant that you were right in style for the times. And by the way, X's on flour sacks made in those days did not wash off very easily. If Lemoncina or Binagli did not wash off anything, nothing would. In Hassan, no? Ah, they know. The title of our program of recollection is, as you know, Nihit Hassel, which means let us remember. Now, we chose this title because there were so many things that happened to us as a people that is really worth remembering, that is happened to us during the war. For instance, in those rare instances when we would gather socially, friends would sing songs and tell jokes that made you laugh so hard that it made your belly ache. Now, as much as we love music and singing, we had to be very careful because our Japanese guards just simply did not like American tunes. So what did we do? We selected a Japanese tune that we liked, and then we put some more words to it. The music you have been hearing in the background is known as the Gunkan March, a Japanese naval song. Actually, the song, the tempo, is very much like our Anchors Aweigh, which is part of the appeal for the Chamorros. Now, I doubt if anyone on Guam really remembers the entire song, but the words that still ring in my ears are Mangareret na tiempo, loti kareran futmat, Ejo jahu na carrera y carrerano malapat. Now, roughly translated, it means we are pacing together, but you are going your way and I'm going mine. Now, the kind of pacing I would like to do is when we are alongside each other all the time. Now, just think about this. These words were just spontaneously exclaimed at the time. But the word that is very important here is alongside, manalapapatit, and that really is what we've always wanted. And it happened 50 years ago, and today that's what we say. We want to walk alongside Americans of every state in the Union. Think about it. It just burst through, and it expressed a very real sentiment of the Chamorros of Guam. We just walk alongside everybody else. That's all. And if you can imagine, the radio, TV, phones, and sirens were all shut up, and all the vehicles and planes were shut down, the silence on Guam will be deafening. You would hear waves roar, the trees respond to the wind. Unfortunately, you won't hear the birds sing. How would you know that bad weather was coming? How would you know the danger's approaching? How would you know what time it was if you didn't have a watch? The answer to all these questions, and many more like them, is that the animals on the farm communicate them to you. After all, they've never had the services of a weather forecaster or a security guard or a watch. They use their natural instincts like our ancestors did before we discovered the foreigners who came to our shores. In addition to this, there were some individuals in our community who would shout a certain way and convey messages and get responses. In Chamorro, we call this esalong. And there were distinct calls to chicken, pigs, cows, and to tell them it was feeding time. To communicate to relatives in distant villages was usually done by relay. You would tell the nearest relative who would pass it on to the next one. And I suppose you could call this the human express. Now, we did not have the services of Sprint to pick up a phone and call. There were times, however, when we had messages that were urgent, and in those instances, one had to run to other villages. Or maybe I should say one had to sprint. To get a feel for what it's like, go to the boonies for a couple of days without a watch, a compass, a map, a radio, and a cellular phone. You know what? I'll bet you'd even enjoy it, even if it's just for a few minutes. In an early episode, I called attention to how we used to make fun of the Japanese soldiers by having to dig caves for them, and we were supposed to be the ones that were the backward people. Well, they had another surprise for us that was more demeaning. With their big horses came not only a huge appetite, which was satisfied in our fields of corn, but also huge flies, as we had never seen before. They became so annoying that the occupation force itself decided to institute a fly control system. Incredibly, families were required to kill flies and submit as evidence containers of various sizes containing the kill. The result of this absurd order was that we had to take time from farm work to get this mandatory requirement met. Now the whole world and the devil know that it was not making a dent on the fly population. But it was done, I am convinced, as a form of subjugation. Now we ended up devising a method on how to kill flies, such as doing it without smashing the insect. That way we were able to fill up our latandudu and our latanganta faster. It also was so insulting that it had our adrenaline going all the time. And I am told that when the old adrenaline is flowing well, you last longer. And you know, that's perhaps why we have lasted as long as we have. We were so upset. You know, to her dying day, my mother, Tan Pangilinan Garrido Bas, was convinced that the good Lord was extra kind to us during the occupation. She gave us as examples the fact that we didn't have any destructive weather which could have devastated our farms. Had we but one of the many typhoons like we had seen in recent years, the story of the occupation would have had a different ending. As further evidence of the good Lord's intervention in our behalf, she reminded us of the very successful results we got from the concoctions derived from our extractions from the Zimbabwe, Flores Rosa, Halinunu, Golondrina, the leaves of the Gaugau, the Pacao, the leaves of the Laguanaja, the Maigolalu, for the treatment of bruises, boils, cuts, asthma, earaches, stomach aches, and even heartaches. Now my mother, who was trained as a native nurse at the Naval Hospital and later became the chief nurse, before she retired years before the war, was absolutely convinced that had it not been for the services of the patera, the midwives, and the availability of amud antigo, amud quinino, the herbal medicine of the medicine man and the medicine woman, we would not have survived the war as well as we did. Now, all things considered, the case in support of the old folks is unassailable and solid. No argument from me, folks. You know, within a few years from now, the word Manyangut could well conjure up images of leisure and luxury, as we're now beginning to see in Manyangun Hills. Now, perhaps that is the way it should be, for we have read in biblical accounts of the legendary phoenix rising from the ashes. Although there were several concentration camps on Guam in World War II, there was only one that has been mentioned repeatedly, and that is Manyangun, because the biggest one of all. Now, unlike the luxurious building placed on hills for prominence, the concentration camp was located in the valley for punishment. In terms of time, the period spent in the valley was relatively brief and lasted but a few weeks. But to those who were herded like cattle in a roundup for slaughter, it might as well have lasted a lifetime. Entire families, from infant to great-grandmothers, were forced to abandon scarce food, shelter, and security to journey somewhere, for some time, for some reason, all unknown to them. We know now where they were sent, Manyangun Valley. We also know the length of the stay. But what we may never know was the reason we were sent in the first place. Was it to protect us by getting us out of the crossfire? Was it to keep us from turning against the Japanese since we were so pro-American? Or was it not knowing what to do with us, they might just eventually keep us alive just to use us as hostages? But whatever the reason, struggling every day to keep alive made every hour seem like a lifetime. If the preceding 2.5 years were the tests, going to the concentration camp was the final examination for the Chamorros of Guam. When the Apollo 8 crew returned from the moon about 20 years ago, I asked Harrison Smith, who taught lunar geology at Harvard, what it was like to be on the moon, and would it make it easier for him to teach the course in geology? He said, no. And I said, why? He says, because I would never be able to convey the dimension of having been there on the moon. Similarly, it has been extremely difficult for most of us to convey the dimension of having been in the valley, the Manyangun Valley. It was one thing to be in a foxhole fighting on foreign soil, knowing that your mother, father, sisters, and brothers are safe and sound in a condo in Manhattan. It was quite something else to be in a foxhole with your